Okay, that got on tape. Let's review the facts of this seemingly very difficult debate about what do you call it? About the Beis Shammai paskin for his adherents, right? So again, what's the issue? The issue is that doesn't matter what the case is, but the issue is that you have machlokas. So it's one thing to say that you have machlokas it stays in the abstract. But it's another thing for each side to paskin for their followers and to say to their followers, follow what I say. All right, that's a bad. Again, today it's normal for us to do that, but in the times of
The second one.
so now that was big time. So the question now is the question is did this happen or not? Now obviously we know when it comes to Gemara what can it be? What? Metzias. It's not going to be Metzias, so that's why the Gemara says, well, the Gemara never entertains it really as a factual possibility. What does the Gemara drive us to? It says, okay, well, 1 second. It's a question of at what point in time did it take place?
Did this ignoring the Havamina?
The Gemara, what the Gemara is saying is that it can't be. There's no Metzias possibility that they didn't know. Rather, it's based on some sort of idea. And now the question is based on this.
When the Gemara says.
So the Gemara says, let's just deal with pre-Baskol. Forget Baskol exists at this point.
So what is a Havamina now?
Yes. There's no Havamina. The Gemara is saying that what's the machlokas? The machlokas about whether or not Beis Shammai paskin for his followers or not is based on a bigger machlokas between Rav and Shmuel.
Of Rov versus one.
Oh, right. Okay. So now Rav says we have to go in. I was telling the guys before, go in conceptual order here. We're in a period of time of when? Let's say before Rov comes into existence. I believe Rov was always part of the system, but let's imagine for a second that we could start from the beginning, where Hillel has a position and Shammai has a position. Hillel has a position and Shammai has a position. So now, when Hillel comes up with a svara and Shammai comes up with a svara, so what do you do in that situation? I'm going to get to that. Each one follows his own svara. If Hillel has a svara and Shammai has a svara, so what do? Each one follows his own svara, right? That seems to make sense, right? Okay. And in the conceptual world, that'd be very good. Now you have something called Rov. Rov means majority. Majority of who? Of the Chachamim. So no, Chachamim. Okay? The Chachamim have to come along and say what? They have to say that we buy position A over position B. Okay? So now, Rav says, once you have Rov in the system, when you ever have a machlokas, what barometer do you use to determine which way to go? Rov. Okay? Why? You have to answer that. Shmuel says no. Shmuel says, well, it depends. All things being equal, then Rov will win out. But if one guy's smarter than the other, and again, that's what Gemara says clearly. I'm not making that up. And the lashon is mechadedi, right? Which Rashi says, he says b'chachma, that they were on a higher level in chachma. If that's the case, so what kind of thing is it to say that chachma, because it's chachma versus Rov, that makes them equal? In other words, when all things are equal, Rov beats everything out. But if it's not equal, now, again, I'm going to say this carefully, not equal, they negate each other, meaning that there's no reason why you have to buy into Rov. You can go by very smart, and Beis Shammai has every right in the world to tell his followers to follow his psak. That's the other reason why I brought the Ritva in. You asked why I brought it in. See, the Ritva says that, they're equal in Chachma and Minyan. But if you go on, he goes, Im Tomar, maybe that's why they instituted Rov. Yesh lomar the hashtav pluksa the Rav Shmuel lo nachsu l'din agudos ela ikra din mamish. We're not dealing with, the concern here isn't about producing agudos. We're getting into the actual DNA of how halachic psak works. You understand? This isn't a question of we can't tolerate machlokas because of agudos. We're getting something deeper than that, which is how the very institution of psak emerges. Okay, and what's guiding? I mean, this is a unique moment in Gemara history. And I'm not saying this is the answer to every sugya, so don't bring in other sugyas. But I'm saying here, the Gemara is actually taking us into the minds of Chazal and how they ascertained Rov would work. And then you have to answer what this possibility is over here. Yaakov's saying that the idea of Rov is not for the Chacham, okay, himself. Because the truth is that if there were only Hillel and Shammais, right? Let's say the world was comprised of Rava and Abayis and Hillel and Shammais, and that was it. So they'd be more than content to live in a world where each side goes based on its own svara, because that's what drives you. But there's a problem though. It's not, and this is. I'm going to tell you what the idea. We'll discuss what the idea is and how it's expressed as a halachic concept. But you got to get to what the idea is. So Yaakov's sensing that whatever this issue is, it's not about the world of the chacham. Rather, it's for the hamon. The Hamon need Rov. Okay, the Hamon need Rov. Why? No, it's not an issue Shtei Torah. It's more fundamental than that. What does that mean, Yam? The problem is that if you have two equal positions, okay, you have two equal positions, meaning logically speaking, they're both equal in Svara. I hold it's Asar, and I have a great reason why. Okay, but why? What's that? First, okay, what's the function of Rov? What's Rov doing? Why does Rov have to exist?
Progress.
What does that mean?
We love progress.
I don't know what that means. What? Is there anything intrinsic in the idea of majority that dictates that one position's more correct than the other?
No, because then you'd be already assuming that Rov is correct.
Exactly, right. So what I'm trying to show you is like this, okay? There's the Torah as it exists in the There's a Torah as it exists in the conceptual world, okay? There's a Torah that exists in the conceptual world, which is machlokes, let's say, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. That's a purely conceptual idea, okay? But we have a problem, though. The problem is you have two equal svaras. There's nothing in that conceptual world that could ever tell me which way to go. Nothing in that realm that could tell me where to go. So what does a halachic system have to do? What does it have to do? It has to come up... What? Okay, so it has to come up and say, we need something external to that, the box of the conceptual world to tell us which way to go. But whatever you're going to say, I'm going to get to you. No, I'm not.
I said I was encouraging you too because I see others.
Okay, saying, but no, I agree with what you're saying. But the point, just let me finish, okay? So the point is that what does the system have to do? The system has to search for something external to the machlokas itself to tell us which way to go. But what you have to understand, whatever that mechanism is, okay, it can't be superior to the spara itself. It's not telling you, people make this mistake. It's not that Beis Hillel was right and Beis Shammai was wrong. If we paskin like Rov like Beis Hillel, it doesn't mean Beis Hillel was right, okay? It can't mean that. It's absurd. They both have equally logical positions. But what you can say is that, but the system for the Am will never work that way, okay? Now, you'll see where the Am comes in a second. But the first step is that you're at an impasse. The impasse is equal logical positions. Now what do we do? So you have to turn to something external to that conceptual world. Now why? What are Chachamim concerned about? They have two roles. One role is in the conceptual, and what's the other role? Hurrah! They got to take that and convert it into the practical, okay? So now when it comes to converting things into the practical, who do we take into account? No, well, Rov is the mechanism, the Am. How they will relate to it. Okay? So now this is what the point Dylan was making. Okay? The point is like this. It's not that Rov is not a logically superior idea than to any svara. That's absurd. Okay? And you'll see why it's going to play a big role with this. Okay? But because if that were the case, it's absurd to. I mean, you'll see why this has to be the case. It'd be absurd to assume that if a guy's a super genius, right, and he knows he has the right idea, you would never tell me that just because the majority hold one way. When Einstein came out with relativity, so most physicists thought he was wrong. So does that make his position any less correct? That's absurd. So Rov is never the barometer for what is right. Rov is simply a machriya. It's something we rely on for the Am to be able to have the system function. Now, why? Because how does the Am relate to Rov? How does the Am relate to Rov? We know the Chachamim look at Rov how? How do the Chachamim wouldn't care about Rov? Because in the world conceptual, what do we care about Rov? Rov is irrelevant. If I have a good svara, I have a good svara. That's the story. That's the story of Rav Eliezer. If I have a good svara, I have a good svara. That's it. I have a good svara. So I don't care about Rov. I mean, it's nice that Rov Chachamim hold that way, but if it makes sense to me, that's what I have to go by, right? So, but how does the Am relate to Rov? Okay, right. Rov is right. Correct. In other words, the way the average person relates to Rov is what? Ask any person. If you ask the average person, right, if the majority holds a certain way, I mean, you see it in religions, etc. What do people always follow? They like that. The majority makes you feel better. Yes. The experts paskin this way. I mean, 4 out of 5 doctors tell you that this is the toothpaste you should use, right? And 4 out of 5 dentists. When you hear that, no, but think about that. When you hear 4 out of 5 dentists say to use this toothpaste, what's your reaction to that? Oh, it must be good. It must be good. Oh, for sure it is. There's a reason why advertisers pick that as a mechanism, because people relate to the Rov in a certain way. If you know Rov Chachamim hold a certain way, so you can understand. So okay, I can buy that. I can buy it. So that's the reason. So just one more point. So the Chacham have to turn to this because they need to take the conceptual system and convert it into the practical. Okay. The road, I know the road you want to stick to, but it's going to run into a problem. if I go to Yeshivas Beis Shammai, okay, if I'm in Yeshivas Beis Shammai, all right, and I'll see a lot of great Rabbanim learning, right? And if I'm in Yeshivas Beis Hillel, I'll see a lot of great Rabbanim learning, right? So how are you gonna ascertain how that Beis Shammai is smarter? But how did the Gemara know? But then what? Let me give you an example. Let's say I told you a study came out of Harvard, okay? A medical study came out of Harvard, okay? Automatically, your reaction would be what? Harvard, okay. Now, let's say I told you a study came out of Wichita State. No offense to Wichita State, but let's say a study came out there. And what are you going to think if you hear that? Not direct, but you're not going to be as convinced versus Harvard, right? Now, one second. Let me ask you a question, though. In Wichita State, what if the guy who came up with the study is a Nobel Prize in chemistry, whereas the guy in Harvard is a graduate student, right? But you wouldn't take that into account because you're not reading who did the study. You know it came from what? The institution of Harvard. Okay, what should I say? Yeah. What? Okay. So there's another way the Hamon relates to things, right? One thing is that when they see the robe of the Chacham operating a certain way, but there's another way, which is that now, and this is what I think when it means a greater Chachma. You can't tell me that every Rav in Beis Shammai was smarter than every Rav in Beis Hillel. That's ridiculous. What you can say is that there's a certain reputation that Beis Shammai had. That people said, oh, Beis Shammai is like Harvard, and Beis Hillel is, let's say, like Brown. Okay? Does it mean that the Chachamim, does it mean the Chachamim in there could have been tons of Chachamim Beis Hillel who were smarter than Beis Shammai? But whatever, I don't know why it developed that way, but the point is, the people related to it that way. So what he's saying is that, one second, Shmuel's saying that when it comes to how the Hamon relate to something, we have another factor that we could take into account, right? How do they relate to the level of the institution? Okay, in other words, they're more likely to follow a psak. Bingo. So the machlokas that's the machlokas. I'm trying to make the institution as a shame with the Am of being the superior institution. So therefore, if the psak comes from it, now this is what the base of the machlokas is. He's saying that Rove is one machriya, but I have another type of machriya. And that is that how? Yeah, exactly. That's the word. Prestige. The way people relate to the institution will affect how they address the psak. So if you tell me you're going to pass it like Beis Hillel, well, listen, Beis Hillel is very nice, but that's like hearing a study from Wichita State. I want Harvard, even though the person who may have come up with the position of Beis Hillel could be infinitely brighter than the guy in Beis Shammai. It's irrelevant because you relate to the prestige of the institution, and that affects how people relate to psak. So the machlokas is going to be, which machriya do you take into account? Is it simply Rove? Right? Or you take into account as well this thing as well. But you understand the move I'm trying to make? This gets you out of the whole issue of speculating how smart they were. And for who cares? That's irrelevant. It's how the Hamon relate to it. That's one spar that ties the whole thing together. The question is a beautiful question. Now, if this is the case, so what problem does Rav have with Shmuel? Okay? But think deeper though. Shmuel, what has Shmuel now done? What has Shmuel done? What has he accomplished?
Division. Division. He's an idiot.
Wait.
He's Wichita State.
What has he accomplished?
Now you have the option to choose which is more acceptable, or which conceptually is better.
Okay, so what have we failed at? What have we failed at now?
Right.
Right. In other words, what Shmuel's position does is now you create what? Now you create you go back to the same problem you had to begin with, which is that we have a conceptual machlokas, we can't know which way to go, and now you have two machriyas. How would you know which way to go? So what has to step in at this point? What has to step in at this point? The Baskol. The Baskol must enter at this point in time because now you have these two logical possibilities.